First, Mr1001nights talks about he's been debating anarcho-capitalists for 4 years, and how it's gotten precisely nowhere, and thus it must be because the anarcho-capitalists are religious fuckwits, religious fanatics. It's like debating religious people, he says. Well, they've been debating you for 4 years, and you haven't changed your position either. He talks about reasons to oppose anarcho-capitalism. Now, I agree with the anarchists that people who call themselves market anarchists or anarcho-capitalists are not really anarchists. Now, of course, the meaning of words are subjective, but anarchism historically has meant to be against capitalists as well as the state. Notice I said capitalist, not capitalism, because capitalism is one of those broken words. And the idea is that the role of the capitalist is inherently exploitative, the capitalist doesn't do anything, as is most forms of land property, sort of. There's a lot of debate on and variation on property norms amongst the anarchists. But the point is that, in fact, Marxists and anarchists were part of the same milieu until Bakunin split off from Marx. It's a bit more complicated than that, and the split was not total. I don't know if there was any real dividing line when the split occurred. But safe to say, just let them have the word. They've been doing it a lot longer. Most people who call themselves anarchists in real life are closer to Marxists than to American libertarians. Okay. First off, Mr1001nights talks about wage slavery, and I assume he's basically in line with a Marxist theory of exploitation. I've heard him talk about it before, and from what I remember, it's basically the idea of the deadweight capitalist, the passive capitalist, and that the capitalist doesn't provide any service, and so anything the capitalist earns is surplus value from the labor of others, and is thus exploitation. But if that were all Mr1001nights was talking about, he probably would not be so up in arms. No, what really gets in Mr1001nights' craw is power, and how the capitalist has control over the factories, the stores, the oil rigs, the means of production. And in a total market that I advocate, the capitalists own everything. Or just about, not everything. He may think that'll be the case. But, well, you'll see why there's a bit of ambiguity about that later on. But anyway, to Mr1001nights, a total market is in the same ballpark of badness as a total state. He may even prefer a total state to a total market. I don't know. He'll have to answer that if he wants to, but that's kind of his mentality. Now, I know Mr1001nights is not against trade, specialization, or the division of labor. So, to address what he's talking about, let's look at what a wage really is. When someone is paying someone else to perform a task, that's the wage for the task. Note, they are not renting their body. And what we call a wage earner is not selling his body. Right? Selling your body is like cutting off your fingers and selling them. Okay, that's selling your body. If the task could be performed by the wage earner, making a robot that performs that task, well, then the profit-seeking firm would be just fine with that. Now, of course, the robot, if it's going to greet some people, it's got to be able to do that in a way that mimics adequately a human. Okay, but if wage earner can perform the task, that's all that matters. That's all they're paying. They're paying for the task to be done. The firm is not interested in the body itself. It's interested in the task being performed. Just as when you hire a plumber to fix a leak, you're not renting the plumber's body or his mind, right? You're paying him for a task, for something to be done, for the leak to be fixed. That is what you're paying for, not for his body to be there. And if you pay someone over a long period of time, say 8 hours a day, well, then you'll get bulk rates for your trade, kind of like when you buy anything else in bulk. When you buy someone's services, you buy tasks rendered in bulk, you'll get bulk rates. And so that's why an employer benefits from that, and an employee benefits from that because, he has a more steady income. Someone who is engaged in such an arrangement is said to, quote, have a job, close quote. Now, let's say, by whatever the property standards are, someone has acquired a factory. Now, Mr1001nights will bring up how many capitalists got their initial wealth from the state, and so he'll question this acquisition in the first place, but that's a separate topic. That's a separate topic for another time. For now, we're just talking about, what is a wage and this wage slavery thing at a more theoretical level. Some guy acquired a factory or a single machine or any tool. Then he offers someone a deal. He says, I'll pay you $7 an hour to use this tool to produce donuts. And it's a donut making machine. A person agrees to this arrangement if it's a better deal than the other options that they know of, right? And this is analytically true. Like, this is true. The owner of the machine then sells the donuts, and he earns $14 an hour. Let's say the owner of the machine doesn't have to do any work to sell the donuts, whatever. So the owner of the machine earns $14 an hour minus what he's paying that person to run the machine, so he's getting $7 an hour. Now, is the machine owner unfairly reaping the value of the labor of others? Well, let's say that the machine cost $7,000. And let's pretend inflation doesn't exist and the machine doesn't have any upkeep costs. And the owner of the machine, the donuts are selling themselves or whatever, and the owner's just sitting on his butt, whatever. Okay, so after 1,000 hours, the owner has earned $7,000, and the laborer has earned $7,000, and the owner's just, sitting by the beach or whatever. Now, after this point, let's say he goes up to 7,000, now 7,007, 7,014, 7,021. Is the machine owner exploiting the laborer? Because the owner of the machine got his $7,000 back, which is the cost of the machine. If he gets more back, over $7,000, is it exploitation in the pejorative sense? What if the owner gets $14,000, twice the cost of the machine? Here is why not even that is exploitative in the pejorative sense. First is time value of money. Right? $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow. And even if we assume no inflation, that is true. Because money can be invested, and so it can be worth more tomorrow. And the capitalist is paying workers today in the hopes that what they will do will earn him money. And those workers themselves can invest the money that they get from the capitalist in stuff that will produce more than $1. Right? And the capitalist has opportunity costs as well. If someone keeps working for the machine owner long after they earn enough money to buy a machine for themselves, yet they have not bought a machine for themselves because they've been spending it all on food, then what that means is that they have a higher time preference than the capitalist. Whereas the capitalist, for whatever reason, is willing to invest in things other than consumption goods, and most people need to spend a greater proportion of their income to eat than the capitalist will say. So that is one service that the capitalist is rendering. That is, he's giving you money now, right? Like right up front, as opposed to you having to invest it and waiting for it. Because, people eat every day. That's right. So you have a very high time preference. The capitalist has a very low time preference. And so because of this, like, he's willing to invest in a lot of stuff, which then multiplies your labor. Right? Whereas if everyone had a really high time preference and nobody was investing in capital, well, then we would have no capital. Another thing that the capitalist does is he shoulders risk. If the firm goes out of business, the workers get laid off, but they still get to keep all of the wages that they earned up to that point. The capitalist, on the other hand, typically loses everything and maybe even more. Now, in the real world, of course, CEOs can run firms into the ground, and they'll get bailed out by the state. Right? And so I'm not talking about what's happening today. I'm talking about a competitive market dealing with this wage slavery thing at a theoretical level. Now, I have nothing against what anarchists call worker self-management. I view worker self-management simply as the role of the capitalist being non-specialized. That is, most firms today have a specialized capitalist. That's all they do. Whereas worker-managed firms would have the capital be managed in some democratic fashion. And the democracy, of course, is limited to the people who are working there, so it's kind of an exclusive democratic body. And it's sophisticated to prevent various problems. I'm not too interested in it, but like there are ways to do it, and and it's just an entrepreneurial issue. Like they come up with some system that'll work, and what'll work will work. Now, given what a capitalist does, that is planning the structure of production, we can infer that profits, i.e. the wage of the capitalist, should be highest in industries that require the most planning, which is in new or radically restructuring industries, like the tech industry. Profits are going to be really high right away because there's a lot of stuff for the capitalists to do. So capitalist activities or the job of the capitalist is in high demand in these new industries. Right? Even through the suffocating regulation and corporate privilege, we can still see this dynamic. Right? It's a little bit muffled because of all that, but we can still see it. And as industries mature, we should see the wages of capitalists fall as their services are no longer needed. Also, I think more mature industries with professionals will tend to have, this more worker self-management, or more appropriately, the diffuse capitalist model, while something like the fast food industry will always tend to be hierarchical. Okay, then Mr1001nights says, there's a well-documented close historical relationship between markets and the state. Okay, then he says, the tendency of owners to form coalitions maximize their power against wage laborers, e.g. the Chamber of Commerce. So, oligopsonies. Well, and we can deal with oligopsonies similar to how we deal with oligopolies. If you offer to pay $1 an hour, you probably won't get anyone to work for you on your machine. So you have to pay a certain amount to get work because you're competing with everyone else who wants to hire people. So it's just, it's just the price of labor, right? It's just the price of certain tasks being performed. It comes about by any other price. You could say that firms, can get together to, conspire to increase the price of oranges like they could. But, as you raise the profits in an industry, what that does is that attracts new capital, and it's going to, because the profits are higher in the industry, like a group of companies cartelize, raise prices on something, they're earning buku profits. Profits attract investments. Basically, the cartel seeds its own demise because profits is the very thing that attracts investment, kind of like a chemical attraction. Similarly, if you're artificially paying workers low, that is going to result in high profits, and that's going to cause new firms to enter the market and bid up the labor, right? And so it's kind of the same thing. So, you have to pay a certain amount to get people to work because you're competing with everyone else who also wants to hire people. Like, there's competition on both sides of this thing. The Mr1001nights references the Chambers of Commerce, and Chambers of Commerce, it's complicated. It's not really. It's like unions, but for businessmen. Some chambers of commerce are voluntary, some are compulsory, and, the voluntary ones are fine, and they shouldn't be compulsory, just like with unions. Blah. It's a simple issue. Then he talks about rent seeking, and that is people buying off the state. Right? The reason firms do this is because they can hide behind the ideological cloak of the state and enforce bullshit they can't get away with directly. For example, McDonald's, could say that in order to start a new restaurant, you have to be approved by, the McDonald's board of approval, and if you're not approved, then some McTroops will show up to shut you down. Now, this wouldn't fly with most people. Right? No firm would obey that law. McDonald's would constantly be sending out the McTroops to enforce this. There would be boycotts, perhaps even armed resistance by people talking about, oh no, it's horrible corporate, tyranny, which it would be, and they would rise against it and all that stuff. And it would be very expensive. And and given how slim profit margins are in industries, my guess is almost certainly McDonald's would go out of business if they tried to do something like this. But McDonald's today, what they can do is they can buy some committee on food, health, and safety, the FDA, and I don't know if the FDA deals with restaurants or whatever, but they'll buy some committee on this, right? And they'll buy the senators, make sure all the committees are staffed by their guys. And then if you oppose this committee, then you just don't want food to be safe. You want to go, you want to go back to the bad old days of the jungle, which itself was a work of fiction. But I digress. And so that's how this game is played. So to all those people who say these regulatory bodies exist for a reason, yes, yes they do. There is a reason for everything. Every effect that we know of has a prior cause. Okay, and so that's the basic pattern. It's old news. And Mr1001nights did a whole freaking movie thing on this, like on this very simple topic. And not only did he do a whole little movie on this, but he thinks that this is some argument against anti-statism. This is some slam dunk argument against what he calls anarcho-capitalism. And no, it's not. It's an argument against the state. Okay, then Mr1001nights says inequality occurs on a free market. And I guess that's supposed to be an argument. I don't know. He just kind of says it and like, okay. Then he asserts that big business would form a state in order to protect their privilege. And I've been over this so many times that I'll just link to this, but all right, the first states were outgrowths of religious cults, and the conquest theory of the state is bunk. It's conquest theory of the state is basically a crackpot status now. Carniero, was talking about Zulus, the Zulus in state formation. No, the Zulus were not forming a new state; they were consolidating a state that had already been formed, and they were gobbling up a whole bunch of little tribal states. And of course, states to function require what I call operationally universal support. And what is operationally universal support? Well, it's a very high level of support that causes us, that is enough. In my mind's eye, it's about 90% that will allow a state to continue to function. When you get something like 20% opposition to a state, you have, revolution. Kind of like in Russia, most people were just kind of going along with the flow. It's a very small population that actually rose up to oppose the state. So you really need operationally universal support, which I think is 90%, in order to maintain a state. Now, this doesn't mean that you like Obama or that you like Bush. You don't have to like them, but you do have to support the state itself as an institution through time, right? And that's where all the I pledge allegiance and the whole red, white, and blue thing, right? Don't get too specific about what red, white, and blue entails. Let people project their own value onto that flag, and so that you get that operational universal support, so they'll swallow the bullshit, right? Whereas if you get into specifics, you're not going to get operational universal support anyway. And just about everyone does, and through this ideological support of the state can enforce unpopular things. So, to say that like business conglomerates are going to get together and form a state, they're going to have to con people, right? And given the suspicions that people have of big business, and the suspicions that people have of government, right? Combine those two, like it's not analytically impossible, but from my perspective, it's virtually impossible. Then Mr1001nights says something that's very funny, okay? Now, first off, Karl Marx was a supply sider, meaning he understood that that you had to increase the investment in capital in order to increase economic growth. If people weren't spending resources on consumption goods, right, and assuming that the amount of work didn't decrease, then those resources that they were producing would be going to investment in new capital, and that's going to drive economic growth. Savings drives economic growth. That's the supply siders. So as awful as Marx was, at least he was on fucking planet Earth in this sense. Keynes, on the other hand, kooky Keynes in La La Land believes that consumption drives increases in production, right? You consume more stuff, and the more stuff is, then growth is going to happen, right? Believing that money that wasn't spent on consumption goods resulted in a downward spiral of wages and prices. Now, I called him kooky, and I'm going to explain his theory a little bit more here. Okay, now, when people stop consume less consumer goods and invest and save more, or they just store money in their mattresses, which causes the value of each remaining monetary unit in circulation to go up, which is basically like, hey, I'm hoarding money, that causes the remaining money to go up, is basically like a gift to everyone else. What Keynes is saying is that when you do this, there's of course a downward spiral in wages and prices when people are consuming less or they're hoarding money. And this seems fine because wages go down, right? Because firms don't have enough to pay their workers. But then again, so do prices of everything because people aren't spending as much money. And so it all seems cool because both wages and prices are going to go down. Well, the problem, according to Keynes, is stick. That is sticky wages. Sticky prices, but mainly sticky wages. And that wages don't adjust downward because of stick, and so firms end up laying off a bunch of workers. Conversely, if consumption is higher, then workers will be able to pay more, and there's less stick going up than there is going down, and so firms won't have to lay off people. And so Keynes basically advocates, a steady level of inflation in order to prevent the downward spiral from occurring. Now, there is definitely some truth to this. People don't like pay cuts, but the thing is, firms that are able to adjust wages downward in a deflationary period are the ones that are going to win out, and those that can't adjust downward, they'll fail. Moreover, the deflationary pressure is a reflection of people's real desire to defer consumption and invest more. meaning that the way out of a deflationary period is to let it run its course. Right? It's a correction that reflects real shifts in time preferences. Right? Deflation is a symptom of an underlying shift in time preference. Now, this is not like when talking about all the other prior booms and busts. Like this is not what happened. I mean, what happened was the Fed artificially expanded the money supply, caused an overinvestment, malinvestments. As the money worked its way through the system, it became revealed that these were in fact malinvestments and that they were not profitable given the time preference of people in the economy. When the Fed artificially expands credit, what it causes the economy, people investing, thinking they end up thinking that there's really all of this deferred consumption, all of these deferred resources that can then be invested, but there really aren't. Kind of like the bricklayer thinking that he has 200 bricks when really he only has 100 bricks, and so he starts building a wall as if he has 200 bricks. And as he starts getting down the wall, he says, "Hey, wait a minute, I only have 100 bricks. Shit, the way I'm building this wall is not going to work," and so he's going to have to bust bricks and restructure, and that's the recession. I mean, that's what is normally happening, not the changing in time preference to people saving more. Like that's definitely not happening in the U.S. Now, in the period following World War II, Japan was bombed out, Europe was bombed out, South America hadn't really blossomed, China and all of the territories of the USSR were communist, India was still pursuing those backwards Raj socialist policies, and so if you wanted cars, refrigerators, or anything involving industry, you were buying American. Gee, the whole world just got obliterated. Everyone's buying everything from the U.S., and in this period, the U.S.'s standard of living has grown at a faster rate than ever before. It must be the unions! Right? That's Mr1001nights right there. Well, I'm sure there was an increase in union membership. Right? I don't have to even look at the statistics, because I know that union membership increased in this period because labor was in a better bargaining position. Right? American firms had huge overseas markets. They needed workers, and so they had near full employment, and so these workers were in great bargaining positions. Right? That's all that happened. Right? The increase in unionization was an effect, not a cause of the prosperity. But prior to World War II, unionization was always higher in Europe than it was in the U.S., and Europe wasn't nearly as prosperous as the U.S. So sorry. The union theory doesn't fit the facts, and Keynesian demand-side economics is bunk on a theoretical level, and it's also not compatible with Marxism. So you're actually going to have to pick here, because Keynesian and Marxism are not compatible. So which is it? Then he said something about capitalists hating full employment because it means striking workers can't be replaced. And I guess this is true in the same way an ice cream salesman doesn't like to have competitors, but like, so what? I would like to be king of the world, right? Just because I want something and I have an incentive to, eliminate all my competition doesn't mean I'm capable of doing such a thing. So unless you can show how the captains of industry are all getting together with senators conspiring to impose policies that will increase unemployment so that, if unskilled workers strike, they can be replaced easily, then unless you can show this, I think we can leave this be. Right? This sounds like one of those cartoon villain things with some ridiculously roundabout plan to get something done. And then for 6, he talks about coercing people not to make, long-term bulk rate labor trades, aka wage labor, because those people will then congeal into a state somehow. Then the businesses will form the state, like I said, or something. And this, Mr1001nights, is what I mean by a headless state that you propose. Mr1001nights thinks that wage labor will lead to aggression against people not party to the agreement somehow, and thus is justified in using force to prevent wage labor. Now, please note that not all anarchists believe this, and you don't have to support the forceful preventing of wage labor in order to be an anarchist. Okay, that went through all the things that Mr1001nights said. I think I was thorough enough. I'll go ahead and leave that be.